Investigations of the utmost sensitivity and importance, often against powerful national figures. It is critical, obviously, that a body like the FBI ought to be transparent and accountable. Instead, the FBI apparently sees itself as a fourth branch of government under no obligation to explain itself to our country's elected officials. This is a problem. Republican Senator Ron Johnson represents Wisconsin. He chairs the Senate Homeland Security Committee. He and his committee have spent years trying to get information from the FBI, only to be, there's no other word for it, stonewalled in case after case. Today, Johnson released former FBI Director Jim Comey's draft statement on the Hillary Clinton email probe. The draft makes it crystal clear that the document was edited in a way that considerably watered down the Bureau's findings to Clinton's benefit. The question is, who made those edits? The FBI will not say. Many suspect it's Peter Strzok. Strzok, of course, has since been exposed as a fierce partisan who detested the president, loved Hillary Clinton, and felt the FBI needed, quote, insurance against a Trump win. Comey's letter is far from the only evidence of FBI heel-dragging. It has repeatedly ignored congressional requests for information related to a whole bunch of things, including the Boston bombing attack, the Tsarnaev brothers, you'll remember, the attempted shooting in Garland, Texas, that an undercover FBI agent helped provoke. The Bureau has even now imposed a non-disclosure agreement on another government watchdog in an effort to keep it from sharing its findings with Congress. Is that even allowed? Senator Johnson has sent 2 letters to the FBI demanding they explain their behavior. He joins us in the studio now. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Well, Tucker.
So the question is, your office released today the draft of this Comey speech, and it's pretty clear that someone changed it in Hillary's favor.
Right.
And I think any reasonable person can conclude that. The question is who. You've asked the FBI to explain who made these edits. Why won't they respond?
They don't believe they need to, or they have to. They're not going to be compelled to, apparently. What's really interesting about this is this draft statement was done months before they completed the interviews. The FBI, again, this investigation into Clinton's email really was not meant to uncover the truth leading to prosecution. From my standpoint, it was really meant to cover up the truth and exonerate Hillary Clinton. And the fact that you have the FBI director writing basically a statement exonerating Hillary Clinton, but in that letter, in the earlier draft, he was using the term gross negligence a number of times. He was talking about the sheer volume of the material that would be classified, which would be one of the standards in terms of why he would prosecute. Later on, he talks about, well, it's just not the volume there. But he earlier had in there that just the sheer volume would indicate this. So there's so many things in the initial statement that would lead to people saying, well, why didn't you indict? And I remember when he held that news conference.
Yes, that was in July.
I had attorneys that were prosecutors, and as he was going through the evidence, people were going, man, he's going to indict her. He's going to indict her. And they're, whoa, he's not indicting her.
But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, so the letter you sent today lays out the timeline, and it's really interesting. So the draft was written or edited at the beginning of May 2016. Comey didn't read it in public till 2 months later.
Yeah, right.
When this was written, basically exonerating Hillary Clinton, they had not interviewed Hillary, Cheryl Mills, and about a dozen other people. So that just looks like a sham to me.
Well, then you take a look at the immunity agreements they gave to Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson. They gave them, they basically blocked the FBI from looking at certain emails for certain time frames that would have proven potentially obstruction of justice. They allowed them to then destroy their computers. This is not an investigation that was serious about uncovering the truth.
So if I'm looking at this at home and I don't live in Washington, why shouldn't I conclude that the powerful get a pass? If I did this, I'd be charged with a felony. If someone powerful like Hillary Clinton does it, she gets off.
Well, that's the problem, is we have seen now with this Lois Lerner in the IRS politicizing probably the most fearsome government agency from the standpoint of most Americans, use a political weapon. We've seen the politicization of the FBI. So we are losing confidence in these institutions that should be bedrocks of our democracy. And again, I have no idea why the FBI just doesn't come clean and provide this information to Congress. What are they trying to hide? What are they trying to cover up?
Have they explained this to you? I mean, how can you exonerate someone before interviewing that person or other key figures in the investigation? Really simple question. Have they answered that?
No, absolutely not. They're not, other than hiding behind the NDA, they're not telling us why they won't release this information.
So you're a co-equal branch of government. Unlike every person at the FBI, you were elected by voters. So a basic question of democracy hangs in the balance here. What can you do? They're required by the Constitution to answer your questions. You probably
we have legitimate oversight.
Of course.
That is our constitutional responsibility and duty and right. And, so we can subpoena. But again, we have no power to really enforce those subpoenas. That resides within the executive branch, within the Department of Justice, and that's where the problem lies.
So what can you do?
We'll keep making these things public, and hopefully public pressure will force the FBI to come clean if they really want to remove the suspicion surrounding not only what happened back under the Hillary Clinton email investigation, but currently what's happening under the Mueller investigation.
I'm not saying this.
Again, they're the same cast of characters involved in both.
Not as a partisan, not as an elected Republican, but it's just an American. Do you find this a little scary?
Yes, absolutely. And more than frustrating.
I can't imagine. Senator Ron Johnson, thank you.
Have a good night.
The State Department apparently struck a deal with Hillary Clinton and her aide, Huma Abedin, that allowed them to remove files, hard copies of files and records they claimed were personal, and keep them from the public eye. This does not happen in federal agencies. Typically, Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry has been on it, and he has details. Hey, Ed.
Tucker, good to see you. These explosive documents out today suggest, well, Hillary Clinton certainly got a lot of scrutiny about her email server. She also had people buried deep inside the federal government, including at the State Department, who helped try to keep her out of trouble. As you noted, this is a result of a lawsuit by the conservative group Judicial Watch. And what they found is that the State Department allowed Clinton and top aides like Huma Abedin to go in and remove electronic and hard copy records from her official time as Secretary of State before she left office. The claim is that they were unclassified records and they were quote-unquote personal materials. In fairness, some of the records were deemed to be personal correspondence, but other records that were removed, we're told, were very official sounding records like her schedules, her call logs, who she spoke to over the phone. We're told Abedin, for example, was allowed to take 5 boxes of physical materials out of the State Department headquarters here in Washington, including a set of records titled Muslim engagement documents. Also interesting is that these records included so-called gift binders. What Judicial Watch believes that to be is lists of gifts that the Clinton Foundation received from various donors around the world. That could obviously shed some light, not just on the gifts that were received, but potential official actions taken by the Clinton State Department. Here's the key question tonight that we do not know, is whether or not there were copies made by the State Department of these electronic and physical records. Because even if they took them out, obviously, there could be a record buried somewhere in the State Department that will eventually come out, Tucker.
And Henry, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're going to discuss what Ed just told us in just a minute with our guest, but first we want to ask him about the changes to the Comey memo. Alan Dershowitz is, of course, a retired Harvard law professor, one of the country's great experts on the Constitution, and he joins us tonight. So, Professor, about the Comey memo, which was apparently was written 2 months before he read it, and 2 months before the FBI completed its interviews of key figures in the investigation, including Hillary Clinton and Cheryl Mills. How could you write a memo exonerating someone before the investigation had concluded?
Well, first let's look at the big picture. Does anybody want to live under a judicial system where one's freedom depends on whether the conduct was grossly negligent or extremely careless? Those are the vaguest possible terms. If you asked 100 potential jurors, which is worse, being grossly negligent or extremely careless, they'd probably split 50-50.
No, that's a great point.
And so these rules are absurd, the way we criminalize conduct using terms like that endanger everyone's civil liberties. Also, let's look at the other big picture. Comey's decision to make the statement calling her extremely careless may very well have contributed to her losing the election. Comey was not her friend. Comey was perceived to be somebody who was trying to strike an appropriate balance. And what I think happened here is ultimately Comey, not anybody else, made the decision on balance that she should not be prosecuted. And that's why the words were changed, because if he had said that she was grossly negligent, people would say, oh my God, that's a crime. But he had already made the decision based on the fact that nobody had ever been prosecuted who was in a position of authority like Hillary Clinton for conduct in any way similar to this, and that was in his statement. So I do think that it was the right decision not to prosecute her criminally, and I think the change of the language was designed to simply support that decision. Now, look, no decision should ever be made until an investigation is complete.
Well,
But every
obviously, but why shouldn't we know
starts
exactly
out
what
with a
happened?
predisposition.
So, but I mean, you're the constitutional scholar, but Congress has oversight, committees have oversight of the federal agencies, including the FBI, and they've asked a really simple question, which was, who made these changes? They can't get an answer. So, isn't that unconstitutional? How can the FBI deny them that answer?
They shouldn't be able to. Our system of checks and balances permits Congress to subpoena and learn what the FBI has done. The FBI is a creature of Congress. It's part of the executive department, to be sure. We have separation of powers, but checks and balances permits Congress to check on the executive branch. So I think transparency and constitutionality require that the FBI disclose that important piece of information.
Interesting. What do you make of the deal that the State Department struck with Hillary Clinton and her top aide, Huma Abedin, that allowed them to take files out of the building and prevented those files from being seen under FOIA, Freedom of Information Act? I've never heard of anything like that. Have you?
Well, I think routinely, people who serve as Secretary of State and other positions are going to write books, and they routinely take material home that are deemed to be personal. Usually copies are maintained at the government agency, and I would bet that copies, electronic copies, exist of what Hillary Clinton removed. It's worth asking about, but I wouldn't jump to any conclusions. And again, I don't want to see criminalization become the first resort. If we don't like what somebody did, lock her up, lock him up. We're seeing that today against.
I agree with you. I agree with you vehemently on that, and I part with some Republicans in that. I don't think that everything you dislike ought to be punished with the rule of law, but I think that one of the reasons everyone is so spun up and feels so threatened is because a lot of this is opaque. A lot of this is hidden from public view. Lack of transparency makes people agitated. And so on what grounds could you hide your public schedule from public view?
You should never be able to do that. It was Louis Brandeis who said that sunshine is the best disinfectant. And our government should be disclosing everything. Everything is subject to disclosure. Unless there is an overwhelming national security reason for keeping it temporarily sealed. Nothing should ever be permanently sealed. And I think transparency trumps privacy when you're a government official.
That's right. You don't have to work there. Professor Dershowitz, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A number of new revelations raise profound doubts, unfortunately, about the Robert Mueller investigation. How can we trust the findings? A supporter of Mueller's team is here to explain why you should just be quiet and accept what they tell you. Stay tuned.